for working with us to bring her to the meeting so we can talk about the Lateral Trail project.
Yes, Kristen is in my fledgling time in the city. She's kind of become my partner on 15,000 things, and one of those is the Lateral Trail. So I will now pass it off to her to give an update to the community on where this long-awaited project stands.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Michael, and welcome, Kristen.
Thank you, Miriam. Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Lai. I'm the project manager for the Pacific Palisades Pedestrian Trail. Before I hop into updates, I did want to have two notes. I actually have to hop on a flight, so I have to leave here a little bit before 7 or around 7. And then the second note is I did receive some questions from the Pacific Palisades board members, so I just wanted to acknowledge that I have reviewed them, I have seen them, and I'll hop into updates and hopefully that will answer a lot of the questions. So as general background for the project, for those that are maybe not aware of it, this is officially titled the Pacific Palisades Pedestrian Trail, and it was created to connect the George Wolfberg Park at Potrero Canyon to the intersection at Temescal Canyon Rd, so that way people can use the crosswalks and cross safely to the beach. This trail, also known as the Lateral Trail, is currently required as part of the Coastal Commission permit for the park, and is expected to be constructed in order to provide park goers with beach access. The trail was given $1.15 million in federal funding, thanks to the efforts of Michael's office, Council District 11, and Congressman Ted Lieu's office. A couple notes about this federal funding. I do want to make it clear that it requires quite a bit of paperwork to do. We have to go through the state in order to access that. And even then, it's not like they just deposit that money into an account that we're free to use. There are a lot of requirements that go with it. There's a lot of paperwork. And so we're working with our state contacts now to try to understand better what those funds can be used for and when they can be used. The park path itself, it currently ends at the city property line, which is a little bit further down if you're ever walking through the park. It ends at that city property line that is shared with Caltrans. And so the city will need some type of agreement or easement in order to construct the trail over Caltrans land along PCH. There have been a lot of meetings throughout the past couple of years with the city and Caltrans. I'm sure many are aware of these. In the most recent meeting between the city and Caltrans and the Coastal Commission had helped set this up. It was understood that before we can proceed with any kind of agreement, the city needs to have a tentative layout for the trail. So in other words, it was going back and forth because there are a lot of different concerns that Caltrans had depending on where we're going to place the trail. So before we can really have a concrete decision and a full plan to move forward, we do need to have a tentative layout. I want to acknowledge that in 2016, Mars Design Services had created a rough layout for the trail. However, this layout is no longer feasible and it's not accurate. It was based on information from 2012. And here in 2024, it's not accurate. So in order to keep this project moving, the city allocated funding for a preliminary or pre-design consultant. They will be getting a new survey and they will be establishing a preliminary layout. At the beginning of this month, our office procured a consultant to do this work. The consultant's name is Geosyntec Consultants. The contract is for a little bit less than $100,000. And we actually just met with them and we walked the entire stretch along PCH just so that they get an understanding of what's out there. The scope of their work is to gather information and get a new survey. And then the main goal of this is to come up with some options of layouts for the trail that are economically feasible, that will meet Coastal Commission, Caltrans, community and recreation and park standards, and that take into account the current layout of the area. At the end of the contract, the consultants will be providing a preliminary report that will outline what the best option is at this time. I do want to note that this report is not necessarily the final decision. That will come during the design phase, which will be through a different consultant later down the road. But this report is mainly just to allow us to start the real estate process with Caltrans. From my understanding, this process, regardless of what kind of real estate needs we have, it will be a significant amount of time. as in years kind of time. So we do want to get that process started as soon as we can. The next step for our consultants will be to organize a community meeting. We definitely want to hear from you. And so they will be sending out flyers and emails, and we'll be working with this community council and Michael's office at Council District 11 to try to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to be heard and to give their opinions and feedback. We'll be having this first meeting just to kind of gather everyone's concerns, expectations, stuff like that. From there, our consultant will be putting together a couple different options for layouts, and then they'll be presenting again to stakeholders and have another community meeting to get more input there. And so in terms of more broad strokes going forward, once we have the preliminary layout for the trail, we can engage in the real estate process with Caltrans. At the same time, we're going to work with our state partners to understand what that federal funding can be used for. We don't want to jump in and create a mess for ourselves if we say come up with a design that won't meet the federal standards, and then we wouldn't have access to that money. So we do want to know everything before we kind of get that process started. At this time, it's really difficult to give a cost estimate or timeline for construction. Right now, we're just sticking with that same cost estimate that was provided in our Coastal Commission progress reports. We're doing that just for consistency. We don't want to have fluctuating numbers and confuse everyone. Cost and timeline are just going to vary significantly depending on what route of the trail is chosen. And this will be taken into account when our preliminary design consultant is coming up with alternatives. They'll kind of note like which ones are higher in price, which ones may be a little bit easier to construct, that kind of things. But they do vary wildly depending on what kind of route is chosen. So I just want to make it clear, like it's really hard for us to try to come up with like a definite timeline and a cost estimate until this report is done. That's kind of the general update. So please keep an eye out for flyers, emails, and other notifications. And yeah, I'm available for any questions.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And yes, you did answer all the questions that we had posed pretty much. So I appreciate that. Leanne and then Chris. Thank you, Kristen.
So my question is about, you had mentioned that it has changed so much from 2012 to 2024 that the previous trail wouldn't make sense anymore. And I'm guessing that's due to erosion. And it makes me wonder, when you ask the consultant, like, are we just going to have this trail for 12 years and then it's going to be a problem? Or what is your ask of them for how long that trail will last? And is there a problem with natural erosion every year? And is that what impacted the 2012 to 2024 problem?
To kind of answer your question in parts, first, what had changed from 2012 to 2024? A part of it was erosion. A lot of it was actually construction activities in the area. So to construct the park, for example, they were using that road to get from PCH up into the park. That kind of changed the topography a little bit. Vegetation growth, that has really impacted the accurate parts of the survey there. And then even other construction, such as Caltrans coming in, that's actually their land, so they use it as a maintenance yard in some areas. And the LA County Malibu feeder line that was recently constructed, all of that has kind of contributed to the changes there. And then in terms of longevity, we do want to make sure that it's not something that is open for 12 years. We want to make sure it's usable, that it's relatively maintenance-free for our recreation and parks family that will be maintaining it. So that's something that our consultant is taking into account. They definitely want to make sure that it's not something that will just, erode away or whatnot.
Thank you. That was a really helpful answer. Thanks, Kristen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. We really appreciate it. You did answer a lot of these questions, so that's appreciated. I just have a couple of follow-ups. Do you have any idea when the first community meeting might be, roughly?
I would expect it. We want to try to give everyone at least at a minimum 2 to 3 weeks notice. So we're working with the consultant now to try to get a date hammered out. I would expect maybe August, at latest September.
Okay. just going back to Leanne's question about erosion and so forth. So right now, as you know, there's that big slide that came down from Via de las Olas that covers part of what was the rough construction trail. So I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that the pre-design consultant is going to be doing as part of a survey, looking at that and seeing how that can be addressed in terms of where the trail is to be located and so forth. Is that right? Is he going to do he or she or it going to be doing, or geotech rather, going to be doing, geosyntech, excuse me, going to be doing any kind of geological survey of any kind on this? Just wondering. Thanks.
They'll be doing a topographic survey, which will capture kind of the layout of the land. We don't want to dive too deep into the geotechnical, like geologic mapping aspect of it. Simply because we don't have the funding for that, and we don't want to kind of get too into the weeds for something that we want to construct pretty quickly. But it is something that they are going to take into account, that landslide that you're talking about. So they could address that more in their presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Steve? Steve, then Sue.
Yes. Kristen, I have a quick question. I don't know if you know the answer, but is the construction of the lateral trail, is that going to be done in coordination with the proposed pedestrian bridge over PCH? I know that it's been subject to discussion in the community and all that, but are you going independently, or is that being considered as part of the lateral trail, or done in a way to complement one another?
Sure. So they are separate projects, and they have separate requirements, separate funds, and separate designs, that kind of thing. But we are aware of each other. We're all sharing the same space. So the PM for the bridge project and myself are working pretty closely to make sure that we're working together on this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I guess I just want to make clear though, Kristen, that it doesn't sound like one will preclude the other. They're both going forward on parallel tracks. I think we all assume that the trail will be able to be done more quickly because it's less complicated and probably less costly than a bridge, but they are both progressing independently and swiftly. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. They are progressing independently. We just are aware of each other, and we're trying to not make sure that we don't deliberately hinder each other, if that makes sense.
Okay, got it. And then the obvious thing to point out at the moment is that the Coastal Commission has required the lateral trail, not yet the bridge, but I don't think there's anyone that doubts they will, but I do want to make that clear. So Sue Pasco.
I'm very concerned. If you look at the old historical photos of the landslides under Via de las Olas, particularly at the beginning of the Potrero Park there, that's just waiting to crumble down, which would mean it would probably go right on to any kind of lateral trail. So I don't think it's really going into the weeds to have a very thorough geotechnical, just have a geotechnical survey of it before the trail's put down and then the hillside tumbles on people.
And I could clarify a little bit. I didn't mean to imply that they weren't going to take any kind of geotechnical considerations into account. Simply that they're not going to be out there drilling like 100-foot borings or that kind of thing. But we are fortunate in that Geosyntech is primarily a geotechnical company. They're very aware of these kinds of things. So we have them looking at it from like a superficial and safety kind of standpoint, but not necessarily like a full geotechnical investigation for that.
Chris? Thanks, Kristen. That made sense. Chris?
Yeah, I'm sorry. One thing I forgot to ask Kristen, has there been any discussion, or is this going to be a future discussion about somehow having funds to place some kind of high enough fencing along PCH to prevent people from crossing until they actually get to the intersection, if you know what I'm saying, a barrier or a fence or something? Or is that something for later discussion?
That would be something good to bring up in that first public meeting that they have.
Okay.
We definitely stress that safety along PCH is one of our goals of this project.
Okay.
But yeah, that would be something for good consideration with the consultant.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kristen. As you all know, we send a meeting recap after the meeting, and I will post this portion of our meeting onto our YouTube channel so people can review what you just shared with us. But I will also share the questions that we sent to you, all of which, or substantially most of which you've answered. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, Kristen, for making time before you get on a plane.
No
All
problem.
right, I don't see any more questions for Kristen. So again, we thank you very much. Okay. All right, so moving on down this agenda, we're going to approve the minutes, everyone. We sent draft minutes from our May 23rd meeting. If there are no objections, we will approve those. Any amendments to those minutes? Okay, any objection to approving them? Raise your hand if you object. Okay, so seeing no objections, those minutes are approved. Consideration of the agenda. So June 27th, as I said, would have been our last meeting of this term. But June 27th at 6 p.m. turns out to be the time of the presidential debate. And I venture to guess that most people will not forego that to come here. So I'm going to ask you all to sort of nod or shake heads as we attempt to reschedule this. We have a couple of options. We can meet from 5 to 6 p.m. on the same day, have a shorter meeting. Presumably nothing big would be agendized, but it would be a shorter meeting and it would be immediately preceding the debate, which would mean for those of you who are going to watch the debate, that would be hours and hours in front of your screens. So that's option one. Option two is to move it back one day. And so we would meet on Wednesday, the 26th from 6 to 8 p.m.